Matthew, I think, covered off the introduction well. My name is Ian. That's TJ. I didn't publicly today announce that I'd raised $8.75 million last month in funding. He did, though, and that they're in 40 states. So that's worth a round of applause and getting that over with, which is phenomenal. We met in 2012, maybe? Early 13 when TJ was, and Elliot, and PillPack were incubating over at Techstars, where I do some mentoring. And it was in one of those sessions where you're going around as a mentor meeting with all manner of different startups. And I think what was really exciting to me when I met them, and I remember the moment that they pulled out this box that TJ spent some time going through, what was so visceral was that I got it right away. Like half the time you're pitching an idea and it needs this elaborate setup. And I think what really worked is TJ said, okay, well, here's the idea right here. Didn't have a whole lot to say beyond that, which was actually sort of refreshing at that point. And you open the box and you get this phenomenal idea, and it just worked. The form factor, everything else. We're going to talk a lot tonight about the decisions that went into that box, the decisions that went into the service that support it. And most of all, okay, great, we've got the funding, we've got this organization that's got all of this momentum in the press, in the marketplace, and it's built on this foundation of empathy. Now we're going to scale it. What does that mean? And how do we try to do that without losing all the things that were so important to us way back when there were a few of us at Techstars? A larger idea I want to get to, we're going to try to run through this by 7, then spend half an hour on questions. I'm sure many of you will have questions for TJ. But an idea that I hope we get to, that we've bandied around a little bit, that I don't think we're going to try to tackle directly, but is worth asking, is this. I was out visiting a friend of mine named Jonas a while back. Jonas is a designer. He's a human factors engineer by trade, who became a designer, worked for IDEO for a very long time. And we were walking on the boardwalk where he lives now in Santa Barbara, and he said to me, he said, Ian, you know what I really, is it okay to say fuck at Harvard? You know what I really fucking hate is when people talk about empathy. I'm so fucking sick of people talking about empathy. Sorry for her. She just walked in and that's what I said. Anyhow, so a couple weeks ago I posted on LinkedIn or something that we were doing this talk, and I got this text out of nowhere from Jonas at like 3 in the morning because it was midnight his time that just said, you're one of those fast company empathy fucks now. And the question I wanted to ask is, how can we keep reading about empathy and humanity all the time and about how companies are building frameworks around it, and yet experiences don't seem to be terribly empathetic or human? How did this all get fast companied to death? Is it a hype thing that's going on and nobody's adhering to? Because we sat down in preparation for the inevitable question one of you is going to ask, which is, can you point us towards a company, a large company, that's doing empathy and humanity well? And ostensibly, we're here to be experts on the matter and talk to you. And it's a really short list, like a crazy short list. I applaud that you're here to learn about that. And I think we have some ideas about that. But there's a lot of work to be done, for sure. So in the interest of not being me talking for an hour and maybe guiding this towards you, I think it would be really great, TJ, if we'd go rewind way back before the funding and before the Techstars and everything else and talk about where this came from.
Sure. So I am actually a pharmacist by training, not sort of an entrepreneur naturally, but had grown up in a family about an hour north in Concord, New Hampshire that owned and operated a pharmacy. And so as a young kid was working both in the pharmacy as well as out delivering medications to people in their homes, right? And so from a young age had seen firsthand how complicated it was to manage multiple meds. And there's a ton of different stories I could tell you, but one in particular, there's a lady that had really advanced macular degeneration, so she couldn't even read the name of the meds in the bottle. And so I'd take a Sharpie and write the first letter of the med across the whole front of the bottle so that at least she would know what drug she was taking. And everyone had this like cornucopia of pill bottles on the kitchen counter. Their Sunday night routine was filling that pill box. They all had this Excel spreadsheet up on the fridge that they had highlighted and crossed out and printed off pill images from online to figure out which one was which, and then constantly have to call doctors to stay on top of all the refills so they never ran out. And I got really fascinated with why this wasn't any better than it was. It hadn't changed in 100 years. And then through pharmacy school was working at one of the larger chain pharmacies. And compared to a mom and pop pharmacy where if someone can't pay the bill today, but they're good for it tomorrow, or you have to give them a couple pills to get by because they didn't have a refill, you lost all of that compassion and ability to sort of have any flexibility with a customer because you're at these very impersonal sort of large retail stores. And if you put yourself in the shoes of someone that has to take 5, 6, 7 meds a month, which is 30 plus million people in the US alone, you have to go to the store 3 times a month because they can't do something as simple as sync up your refills because the insurance company won't pay for it. Then you're there and there's a huge line behind you, so you don't want to ask the pharmacist any questions. You have this cardboard wall in the middle of a retail store to talk about private health information. And I really thought that there had to be a better way to re-engineer this experience. There was no reason that it had to be this bad. And through pharmacy school, thought a lot about what we could do to fix it. Can I build an app to make this better? Can we build a smart device to make this easier? And really got to the place where it felt like in order to make the kind of impact that we wanted to make, you had to own the end-to-end experience because so much of it was wrapped up in the way that you bill, so much of it was wrapped up in the way that you communicate with folks, and it wasn't a thing that you could just shove a piece of software at and expect it to fix the problem. You really had to think about the entire end-to-end experience. And so that is what became PillPack, and we started the company in January of this year, and that's when I met Ian, or January of 2013, and that's when I first met Ian.
I think one of the things that we talked about a lot early on that I haven't heard talked about as much, or that was new to me, right, is this idea that the pharmacist, even more than your primary care physician, right, has the broad purview on your health. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that applies to a system that ostensibly should be at its core a humanist system,
Yep.
and is frankly, in a lot of cases, run off actuarial tables, right?
Yeah. I'll probably mess these stats up. The average American sees the doctor about twice a year. Average pharmacist about a dozen times a year. On top of that, you have a pharmacist is going to see all the medications you're being prescribed across all of your prescribers. So even if it's the PCP, oftentimes they don't know what is being prescribed. And so you have this ideal opportunity to add a lot of value to that customer's life, to really understand what they're going through, understand how to make a difference on their therapy. But you find that you're in the middle of a retail store and it's all about script volume and pumping out prescriptions and very little time to focus on what the customer would like you to focus on, which is providing great service and experience. And so I think that changed a lot, right? You had sort of old school apothecaries in the heyday of the sort of soda fountain pharmacy where it's like cornerstone of communities, right? They knew your family, they knew everything about you, and as big box retail sort of took over, you lost that. And I think we're at an interesting time to be able to bring that relationship back in a scalable way using technology, and that's what we hope to do. But a lot of it was about why is this relationship super impersonal when it's such an important relationship in your life?
I think what would be really useful, actually a particularly useful way to approach the time, I would love it if you would take us through the box itself. So this is the package that shows up, and I'm a customer, so I get a package that's slightly smaller than this. But talk to us about what the kid working at your dad's pharmacy did here. Like, acknowledging you're not a designer, but what were the design choices that have been made in the physical product itself that reflect that?
So a lot of it was thinking about how do we take all of the things that people are like hacking together in their home right now and do that for them in a sort of a better way. And so, I'll walk you through what the product entails, but effectively we tried to make it sort of the polar opposite of getting a brown paper bag with things shoved into the bag, that it feels super haphazard and not sort of calming. And so the box is really clean. Obviously, the only thing you see is a dispenser. There's no personal information here, so if you open it in front of other people, there's nothing to worry about. And that was an important decision. And then one of the things that we replicated is we have a med list here, so all of your meds are in one place. And this is effectively taking that idea of being a 17-year-old kid, seeing that Excel spreadsheet, trying to figure out exactly how we do that, but for them, and it's always up to date every 2 weeks, right? So you had something that was always sort of hacked together and printed out online, and we can do that in the pharmacy because we do have all that information. And so you have the single label here. We have an image of each pill, which is actually not a trivial thing to do. You have a generic drug like metoprolol, right? There's 100 different manufacturers of that drug. And so we literally when we can't find a drug, we're in the pharmacy with an iPhone snapping a picture, cutting it out of Photoshop, and uploading it to our own, effectively a proprietary database now to enable that. So it's things that seem obvious. Of course, you can just print a pill image. Why wouldn't you do that? But it's more work than just purchasing a database of those images.
Why is it, hold on, I'm going to ask questions as we go. Why is it important that you have the picture of the pill there?
So one of the things you find, there's crazy stats about if you just change the color or size or sort of imprint on the pill, it's something like half the time people stop taking that med. And people think you associate it with this pill, right? So if you go to CVS and for 3 months it was blue and it was round, and that's the one I like, and I come back and this month it's white and oval, of course I think you screwed up, right? You probably gave me the wrong pill. In reality, they're just choosing a different manufacturer because it was 30 cents cheaper to buy this bottle than this other manufacturer. And so it was a way to help folks realize, to know which med was which and understand that it was the right pill. And we also tried really hard to not to change those pills frequently.
Okay.
And so you also, one of the things we learned when we were working with Audio was for a long time we'd always assumed you'd want your name printed on each one of these packs. You want to make sure that this is my pill pack, right? And so when we did research, everyone hated that because they literally have 5 meds that I take, and you can attest to this because you're a customer. But you had the 5 meds you take with your name printed on it. You ripped it over and tossed it in the trash 3 times a day, and that's like from a privacy perspective, not a great experience. And so we only include the name on the first med that doesn't have any med information on it. I think you've brought this up in the past, but
the first thing you showed is the thing I dislike the most.
Yep.
Which is that I can't rip off this label when I'm done to recycle it. It's hard to get this label off, and so now I can't recycle this box because it has a list of all the meds that you're working on it.
We're working on it.
We're going to cut him some slack because he had a big week.
Yeah, so I think there's an easy solution there, which is to pull your name off separately,
I agree.
Right? On top of that, you have,
I like how you turned that back on me.
I did.
Like I'm lazy.
Yep,
All right.
I'm not calling it anything. So we also have effectively hidden all the medlit that you'd usually get inside of a bag. It's very much there, and I think we've tried to make the font and text really readable, but it's not in the way, right? So if you want to pull out the medlit, it's inside this box, but sort of hidden away, and you're struck with how simple and plain and sort of calming the box is when you open it. And so this was both, to your point about being a kid delivering medications to people in their home, both things that I thought were interesting about what folks were doing to hack together their meds, and also reaction to what I felt was not a great experience about that, right? When I had to just hand over the bag and it didn't seem very thoughtful.
The story that blew my mind was the one you told me about the woman, and this was fascinating, who when you talked to her said, and it's just not a use case I'd have ever invented, that she wasn't able to overdose because the idea of opening up 30 different packets to get those pills out one at a time was enough of a hurdle to not. And no, it's absurd. It's okay to laugh, by the way, right? It's an absurd idea. On the other hand, it's an enormously real problem.
Yeah.
I don't think that was by design. I have trouble imagining you had a persona somewhere back on a whiteboard.
Yeah, it definitively wasn't by design, but it was a sort of shocking experience from someone that's never built a product and then thrown it into the world and seen how people use it differently than you anticipated. Mm-hmm. Like I remember I was literally on the phone with the customers, one of our first dozen customers or something. And she said, it's so great to have PillPack. I just absolutely love it. And I was like, yeah, isn't it nice? Like it's so much cleaner and like less clutter. And she's like, no, like you don't understand. Like I had such a hard time not taking too many of my meds. I just got out of rehab 6 weeks ago, and PillPack is the first time that I look at it and say, oh, I don't want to screw up all my meds for the rest of the week to just take an extra 2 pills today. And it's a use case that we literally had never considered. And I think hopefully there's more of those as we go.
So you're on as far by my track, your 9th or 10th revision of this product in some way or another. Change to the box, change to the packaging in some way or another. How is it, what are the litmus tests that you apply to that? So you're going to make a set of changes. You're obviously talking to people. How are you doing that?
Yeah, so we try to actually talk to people in their homes as opposed to bringing them to the office. So tactically, we reach out to customers, try to get the different use cases. So both, on the sort of 20-year-old sort of age agnostic conditions to an elderly person that's either independent or has a caregiver, and going into their home and trying to understand where do they store their meds, what do you like about the existing product, what do you not like, and I think you get to the place where you realize there's so many improvements we can still make to this that we haven't made yet. I think we've talked about a handful of those. But it is really about listening and sort of challenging your assumptions, especially because I had grown up in this and I was 16 years old doing, delivering meds to, that's 12 years ago, and I think I have all the answers, but then to go revisit all those assumptions and understand that you're not always right and customers have different expectations and using that to inform the product.
We've talked a lot, and we'll get to this more when we talk about how you scale. We've talked a lot about the idea that this is the replicable part,
Yep.
right? Like there's absolutely nothing that prevents CVS from shipping this box tomorrow. It'd be red, and they would do a terrible job with their type because they do. But functionally, there's nothing here that they couldn't order and replicate and fabricate at a lower cost,
Yep.
and more easily. But which I think to me is an interesting segue to the service. The story I always tell when somebody asks, why do you love PillPack, is this one. I got an email early June, saying, hey, if you're taking a vacation this summer, ping our pharmacist and we'll make sure that you have extras before you go. So if you're going away for a couple weeks, you don't have to worry about missing your meds. The idea that a pharmacy had reached out to me to make sure that I was going to do that and had tied it to the time of year sort of blew my mind. I think I dropped you an email that night, expressing what a big deal that was. So there's an element of service design here that's every bit as important. In fact, by my measure, probably considerably more important. How is it that you've gone about translating, again, what this young man, boy who worked in his father's and grandfather's pharmacy, how did you go about translating that into a service? I think that's fundamentally at the heart of what a lot of people here are trying to do.
Yeah, so I think it's an important point, and it's the same point that I think our customers would across the board make. I think the packaging out of the gate is obvious. It's obvious why it's differentiated and why it adds a lot of value. It's very easy to grok when you first see it. But we run monthly surveying and try to understand what our customers really love about the service and push on those things. And very, very rarely is it, I love the blue box, it's so great. It's always, I love Nick, he's such a great pharmacist, he's always there, he emails me back on Saturdays, this is crazy. I love calling, they're so nice, it's so friendly to me. And I think it's a lot of it is wrapped up in how you treat customers, and it's not sort of a thing that is rocket science. I've said this in the past, it's really just treating humans like humans and trying to figure out what their needs are before they do, especially around things like their medicine. But it's not as simple as sort of, we think this is a great idea, let's send you an email about vacation, right? There's a lot of underlying needs that enable that. Using that as a specific use case, like in order to give you your meds, so typically if you went into a pharmacy and said, I'm going on vacation, I need an extra supply of my meds, they can only supply you what their insurance company will pay for, right? So we can't just sort of freewheeling say like, here's all the meds you want and expect the insurance company to pay for it. So doing that well means you have to actually redesign how the billing processes work, sort of underlying billing. So we bill monthly, sort of irregardless of when the shipment leaves. And there are hooks like that customers frankly don't care about and they shouldn't have to care about, but you have to do it to enable things like giving you extra supplies before you leave for vacation. So when you think about service design, it's about understanding the customer needs and understanding how you can work within those constraints to enable that.
So let me ask about a hairier one, which is, and I'm going to put you on the spot terribly, maybe a little. Somebody walks into your father's pharmacy and they're short, credit card bounces, debit card bounces. In the yesteryear that you described, the idyllic American Leave It to Beaver thing that you described, the pharmacist says, you'll get me later, I'll put it on the house tab, your health is more important. I don't know, I have trouble imagining that happens at a Walgreens or a Rite Aid or a CVS. I doubt that the pharmacist has that kind of latitude. How do you do that? How do you tackle that challenge, right? Because the people you've described as your most important customers, and I know everybody's important, but your most critical customer are these people with chronic conditions, right, who are taking 7 or 8 meds, I assume not because they want to.
Yep.
So how do you reconcile this idea that we're this humanist company that really wants to help people live better, or at least help them live the way they need to, and we got to get paid?
Yeah, I think it's always a tough balance. And we are literally in the midst of designing exactly what those emails look like when your card gets declined and what the timing looks like and when we effectively shut off your account, right?
So my question is then, how do you go about making that determination?
I think billing for us is one of the most complicated things.
It's a massively regulated
Right.
industry.
So part of the complexity is you legally can't give someone their meds that their insurance company is paying for and not charge them their copay. There's laws that require you, obviously, if the insurance company is reimbursing, to also recoup the copay. And so you have to work within these constraints. But the flip side is what we found is, I think it's very easy to have a card decline and very easy for a new card to change, for an HSA balance to run to zero and you need to change it to a different card. But we think, and the hypothesis is that within a month, right, if your real intention is to pay that bill, and we'll be happily work with you to get that bill paid, even if it drags along, as long as we know what the plan is, that's okay. If it gets beyond a month, there's concern that there's intent that they're trying to fraud you, right? And so you're trying to ride that line between being as helpful as we can for someone that is not the intent, and also figuring out where we think it's reasonable to assume that if you can't get a hold of them for a month, they're probably not trying to pay you.
So I guess what to me is far more interesting than even the intricacies of the billing is this idea that's baked into that, right? Yep. That keeping somebody continually taking those things that they need trumps
short-term cash flow.
Trumps almost everything except the person who's trying to screw you.
Yep.
All right. My question is that written down somewhere? Are there a set of principles that you're using or lenses that you're using to say, as we make decisions about this or the service itself, here are the things that we have learned about dealing with people or that we hold true that we're using as a litmus test to make these decisions?
Yeah, and so we worked with IDEO to develop design principles, and it's one of the first things that a new employee at PillPack goes through and understands. And we also, everything is framed around how do we make this easier for the customer. So anytime you're making those decisions, that is always the intent. And I think it helps inform the entire process of developing this product.
Can you talk a little bit about what those principles are?
Yeah, so one of the concepts, I think it's easier to talk about them sort of in concepts, is we treat products effectively like an onion layer, right? So we try to keep things really simple on the surface for customers, and then as they want to drill in, there's not an inability to learn more and figure out more, but if they don't really care, they don't need to care, right? The box can keep showing up, and this can effectively go on autopilot, and you don't have to dig in and become really engaged with managing your meds. So that's sort of one core thing that we think about when we're designing product. The other is to communicate clearly. So things like when your bill is overdue, we spend a ton of time on copy and figuring out exactly how we communicate with you to help you understand what's going on. And there's, I think, a lot of work that goes into things like communicating when your bill is overdue and everything else that is very intricate and requires a lot of sort of thoughtfulness about how you communicate that.
Can you give me an example? I mean, I think we can agree with that sentimentally, but can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, so we are in the midst now, you have issues where part of our value prop is that we are the ones chasing your refills for you. So you don't have to go call your doctor, right? And when we send you the emails, there's times that doctors will not send us the refill. They either require the patient to see them before they're going to refill the med. They require that the patient request the med themselves. And there's ways we need to be able to communicate that clearly. And so we're sending an email to the customer that did not have a phone number in it, right? So we're saying, go call your doctor, but we didn't give you any information to do that. And I think adding something as simple as the phone number made a meaningful difference in how that came across to the customer. But that wasn't as simple as just, putting that phone number in. You had to query databases to do that.
So where did that insight come from? Is that a conclusion that you came to because you had a particularly attentive UX designer on it? Or is this something that's coming from customers?
A little bit of both. So that was primarily from me, I think, frankly. When we were developing the product and that email in particular, it was back and forth with engineering to figure out how we could get the phone number included because I'd seen that something like CVS calling your phone multiple times telling you you're out of refills is not a useful thing if they don't give you any more information than you're out of refills.
So that, I think, segues nicely to the point I was getting at earlier, which to me is that it's the service side of your business that can't be replicated immediately, that CVS would trip over, right? Or that a Rite Aid couldn't scale. And And my question, to me, I think one of the key distinctions is probably in this capacity to listen, right? At the heart of empathy is the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. So what have you done internally? And these aren't like pre-screened questions. I truly don't know the answer to this. What are you doing to listen? How do you listen?
Me personally, or how does the team listen?
How do you build an organization that starts there?
So everyone participates in customer service, from engineering to design to marketing.
What is customer service?
So we have online chat with the pharmacy, right?
Right.
With a customer, sorry. And so one of the things that everyone is participating in that and understanding what is actually going wrong. People are constantly filtering through the email. So Jackie, who runs our marketing communications, isn't just doing sort of marketing communications. She's reading customer emails and understanding how to think about how to make that product better. So it's not just that the product is in charge of what product looks like. It sort of transcends the whole company.
There's a program I think is still in place at the Disney Parks and Resorts programs that every member of the leadership team has to spend 3 days a year working in customer service in the park. I heard stories about somebody, an EVP of marketing in that group serving popcorn on Main Street, USA, right? Which is a funny image in your head, but when you think about a company whose entire proposition is predicated on the ability to deliver amazing customer service and to make sure that people are having this experience that they've, as a parent, paid through the teeth for, I think there's value in doing that. Is that something people are, like, has that led to product and service innovations, ideas? How does that manifest itself?
Yeah, I think it does. I think a lot of it has to do with how we think about what is priority to build, right? And so the refills is one example of that. Like, we had to build infrastructure to request those refills and things because we were finding that it was becoming a meaningful problem to not have it, and you'd get customer feedback looking for the refills and things like that. I know that sort of engineering likes it because if pharmacy is ever saying that we need to take over customer service, for instance, there's a lot of pushback on anyone else that's involved in building the product. How it's manifested in sort of tactical ways, I think is still a little bit to be determined, but it certainly has happened.
Now, you still work in the pharmacy, right?
I was on the phone with a customer last night, like 11:45 for midnight.
See, so even when you get the money,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. And now your dad is coming to work in it, right?
Yep.
So your dad spent his whole life as an over-the-counter pharmacist, right? What's his view on this? Not how does he like it or is he proud of his son, which is a fine discussion and a good one to have over beers, but a much more interesting, so when he looks at the product, when he looks at the service experience, what does he see?
So interesting sort of backstory of my dad. He actually used to run CVS for the whole East Coast when CVS was still a relatively small chain. And I think he'll tell stories of back in those days, it was always about the customer, right? That was always the focus. And as pharmacy grew and it sort of chain started buying up all of the mom and pop pharmacies, that went away. And I think for him to see this come full circle and to be able to bring that back is really exciting. And also, he's having a lot of fun, like building the team that helps us do that. I think he saw it for a long time. He saw it at some meaningful scale, right? Not the scale that those chains are at today, but he understands how to think about building those teams and structuring it in such a way that is still the priority as you build the organization.
So if I were a real skeptic and not a total humanist with empathetic tendencies, and I was sitting out there, what I would say is that it's really easy. Like at some point, not that it's really easy, I think what you do is great, but that at a certain point, you're still in that back in the day stage, right? And we all know you're going to follow this massive trajectory and be a master of industry and all of those good things that come with it. Maybe some new boots or something. But my point being, how do you scale this, right? Like, how do you take all the things you've talked about and scale that? Because nobody's giving you, not that they're giving you, you earned it, but not that anybody's funding you staying just as you are at the scale that you're at now, right? You're in 40 states, hopefully 50 at some point here, but when you are CVS, how are you not CVS?
I think to our earlier conversation about companies at scale that are empathetic, it's a really hard question to answer.
A lot of them probably were.
Yeah. So I don't think it's a short answer. I think there are complexities to scaling operations, which are sort of totally different, right? It's how do you scale the mechanical needs of being able to dispense custom packets for tens of thousands of people or whatever that looks like. So I think it's something we're trying to understand and trying to do. A lot of it is about hiring people that are on the exact same page about exactly why we do what we do, which is to make customers' lives a lot easier. And I think how that will scale over time is going to be difficult, right? I don't know if there's a simple answer to that, other than trying to empower folks to be able to keep that at the center of both the product development, customer service, and everything else.
I think all of us, when your subscribers number in the thousands or tens of thousands, it's one thing to take on a policy that lets people get 2 more orders. When it's 1 million people, when there's 5 million people subscribed, and X percentage of them are going to miss a payment, cash flow changes radically.
It does change radically.
Right? How do you then, aside from the people, how is it that you bake these principles into your systems? How do you go about saying, when we make a decision about this at 10x scale, we're going to use not the same litmus test, but similar litmus tests? How do you stay in people's homes?
I think a lot of it is about choosing partners that are on the exact same page about that, both on sort of on the financing side. Like I think if that's not important as high up as the board of directors, it's going to become a problem, right? So I think everyone being on the same page about the customer experience being the most important thing is super important as we scale.
It's really easy, I think, in 2014 to have these conversations about customer experience is the most important thing, because back to my point earlier, Fast Company is telling us all that the customer service is the most important thing. And I don't mean to be facetious about it. I think we see it all the time. It's really easy to sit in a room and say you're customer-centric. We see it every single day, right? That clients say we have to be customer-centric. When that's faded and there's no longer any equity in saying it, how do you keep that going with a room full of people who've invested a lot of money with you? Can you tell us a story about where that's come to? Have you had conversations about the decisions that you're making that have with VCs, for example, that have changed the way you'd approach it? I won't ask you to name names.
Yeah, we've had conversations with potential VCs that we didn't decide to work with. I think it informs how you go to market, right? So if we want to work with a large insurer, a large employer, as opposed to the end customer, that's going to inform what the products that we build and what we care about. And so when we were evaluating different funders, that was a super important distinction. Even though it doesn't feel like that would impact the quality of the service or what we were building or anything else, it would, right? Because if our main sort of business channel is to go through a large insurance company, we become super focused on how to decrease their cost burden, how to time the refills the way they want us to, as opposed to how we time them for the customers. And so it informs who we work with on all fronts.
Is there a story you can tell us that unpacks that a little bit more?
Not a great one, no.
Okay. So let me ask, I told Dimitri I was going to ask you a hard
Still
question.
in press training mode, if you can't tell.
No, you are. You're well trained. So let me ask you one that throws you off, right? What happens? How do you build a company so resilient and rooted in these ideas that are important to you that when the board decides, look, we've now put this kind of money in and this company is playing with these stakes, and we now need this company to be run not by the pharmacist, but by somebody who knows how to run a $1 billion company or a $5 billion company, that the things that matter to you now matter to the organization then?
It's a great question. I think it is at the core of what we're doing, and it's what's most important to me. If the board brought someone else in to run the company, it would turn into a very different type of entity, right? And different ideals. I don't think there's like a short snippet answer to how you solve that problem.
I doubt
I think
is.
that it's not a simple question, right?
No, it's not. Is there, though, Does, for example, keeping pharmacists involved in that higher up in the organization than I imagine that they are at a lot of commercial pharmacy chains in the decision-making process? Would that hedge against the loss of empathy?
I don't think intrinsically, no. I don't think it's definitively about the fact that it's a pharmacist sort of calling the shots. I think it's about whoever's in that seat understanding that the goal of the company is to build a great experience. And oftentimes that's not pharmacists, right? I think it is dependent more on the approach than it is about sort of the necessary skill set. I think there are plenty of pharmacists that don't have that approach, and there are plenty of folks that build products that don't have that approach. It's really about that mentality more than it is about keeping pharmacists at the sort of top of the org structure.
If you guys all promise not to tweet, if I promise to ask him a really hard question, can we make that deal?
He's been easy so far.
That one wasn't.
That one wasn't.
This is a little harder. Please don't tweet the answer to this no matter what. You can, but he'll get mad at me later. Would the loss of control over your ability to serve end user needs impact a decision around, for example, taking this thing public at a certain scale?
So you're saying, can you?
I'm saying that if the trade-off with going public would be a loss of control over your ability to, at the end of the day, help more people profitably for you and for your investors, keep taking the medication that keeps them whole. Would that impact your decision to take it public?
No, I don't think so.
Very honest answer.
Well, I mean, I don't want to be a public company CEO anytime soon, so I've got some time to think about that. But I think, no, I mean, I think I didn't start this company necessarily to IPO, right? I started the company because I'd seen a very specific problem for very real people that was not being served at all well by the existing infrastructure. And so to trade improving that for, a marginal financial outcome doesn't make sense.
Back to the question we started with that I don't think we have a great answer for yet. But what makes this so incredibly hard, what you're doing? What makes it so hard to move beyond the discussions about being customer-centric, the discussions about empathy? Why is it that Jonas is on the pier in Santa Barbara screaming about this, saying it's harder than just talking about it?
Because I think it is harder than just talking about it. I don't think I know all the answers to those things because we are not at the scale that these things get really, really hard. I think we have a team that is fully bought into exactly what we're doing, and we're serving a customer base that it's quite tenable to do that. I think the answers to how you do that at scale are very different challenges and things that hopefully we're learning as we scale the company. But those are really sort of hard questions without clean answers, which I think is why it pisses people off to say, be a customer-centric company and be empathetic. And then what does that actually look like when you drill out to bullet points? It's really hard.
Let me invert that. Have you found, or would you agree with the statement that it has been, with the partners you have, easier, or that it has been an attractive quality of the organization to your investors?
Yes. To our investors. I'm sure it's not attractive to some investors. But I think it is probably the main reason that we've been able to raise so much money so quickly, is that we're not, started pharmacy school 12 years ago, right, or 10 years ago, whatever it is now, with the intent of doing something like PillPack, and they're fully bought into exactly what we're doing, and that I think has been a lot of the reason we've been able to raise the money that we have and build the team around the idea is because it's more than just about a financial outcome. I think there's a lot more that underlies what we're doing than just, an acquisition or an IPO or what have you.
So to the people in this room, the groups here who are working on their own ideas, some of them I know work in Matthew's program around social enterprise. There is interest out there in doing it this way. Why don't we open this up to questions, primarily I suppose for TJ, although I'll occasionally jump in with an editorial on companies who do it wrong. Does anybody have a question for TJ? Yeah. By all means, just sort of stand up. Tell us who you are and why you're here, just so we have some context for the question.
Yeah, I study in HBS. I'm a first-year student. Yeah. I'm very interested in this because I was trying to start an online pharmacy business in India. prior to coming to HBS. We didn't start because of regulatory reasons, but quick question to you. So, considering your target market of people who have to take more than a certain amount of medications a day, right, or a month, they're already plagued by high costs, right? And medicine in the US is especially more expensive than anywhere else in the world. By adding things like the PillPack, you're probably making it even more expensive for them. So, is profitability versus making medicines more affordable to them through an online channel any part of your strategy in the future?
Yeah, so sort of on a simple level, it isn't typically more expensive for the customers that we're serving. They pay their same copays as they would at a CVS or Walgreens or wherever they fill in their meds today. And so in that sense, from a super simplistic level, it's not any more expensive. That wasn't always the case. So we actually started out charging $20 a month and had found that for people that have to take 7, 8, 10 meds a month, tacking on another $20 a month was meaningful. And so we did remove that fee. It literally costs the same as going to a typical pharmacy. I mean, I think there's a pretty long conversation around whether the US should have price controls around meds and whether we should be subsidizing R&D sort of for the world for brand name medications. But for our customers, typically it doesn't cost anything additional beyond what they'd pay anywhere else.
How did decisions about that cost? Can you unpack that a little bit more? So yeah, when you started out, your customers, including me, spent this extra $20 a month for it. How did you come to the decision to remove that? Was it purely a play for scale? And how is it that the price ties into things like the packaging and the details that you make here?
Yeah, it was pretty basic. It was purely a play for scale, is the short answer. I think we have unit economics that definitely work without the fee, and the goal was to get PillPack into as many hands as possible. So it was a pretty simple decision when we looked at conversion rates and lifetime values and all those sort of the boring things. That made it a pretty clear decision.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Daniel, HBS first year. I'm interested because I've been needing to get my mom on PillPack. My mom's hands don't really work so well. I'm wondering if you considered this in your design and what sort of alternative options you considered.
Yeah, so we have considered it, and we did testing when we were with IDEA with folks that had really advanced rheumatoid arthritis and sort of joint degeneration. And the packets are super simple to open, especially compared to, child-safe caps that you get at a pharmacy. And so it definitely works. I think there's opportunity to make it even more friendly. I think it works well if you know exactly how to use it, but I think you would probably know this better than I. But it feels like it's sort of an education to figure out where to rip it open versus not, more than it needs to be.
I think you're suggesting that I'm older than you, which is true. I actually think that raises a really fantastic point that we've talked a lot about back and forth, which is that a lot of people manage the medications for someone else, right? How does that shape, how does the fact that at a certain point, I'm going to be caring for my parents, they're going to live somewhere else, and that I'm going to manage this for them, how does that play into the design of a service like this, that you're now dealing not only with an end user, but you now have a customer experience that deals with more than one customer on the same transaction?
So the short answer is the service actually doesn't support that super well right now. It does, but it's not been designed for that use case.
But the largest generation of Americans ever is about to squarely hit this head on.
Yep.
And my friends and I are all going to have to take care of them.
Yep. So I think there's opportunity to create sort of separate, different experiences if it's for a family caregiver or not even a paid caregiver to take care of loved ones. I think one of the important things we had to decide out of the gate is which sort of use case do we care about the most, right? Because you can't do all of these things super well. And we found that from a marketing perspective, from sort of the biggest pain point, it made the most sense to go direct to the exact user as opposed to son or daughter for a caregiver. So there's not like a split in the sign up where you can choose that I'm signing up for a loved one as opposed for myself. The flip side is we have tons of folks that do that. And we've made it as simple, a lot like online banking, where there's not sort of separate accounts for an online bank when you're signing up mom or dad. But generally speaking, it is designed for the end user.
Something we haven't talked about at all, and I'm sure there's somebody else with question, but now that you bring in multiple users with access ostensibly at some point to the same information,
Yep.
and you're dealing with health records,
Yep.
we haven't talked about
Part of it.
privacy at all, and it's a really strange thing to sit here and talk about empathy and understanding people and not talk about medical record privacy, which is there's probably a marketplace advantage for you in the way that you handle that as well. But what are the discussions you're having internally about that and how that relates to the product, or in this case, more specifically, the service?
So one of the biggest discussions lately, so a lot of things around privacy, especially when you look at HIPAA, is that it's not super, it doesn't tell you exactly what you have to do. There's a lot of leeway for what you think is appropriate. And we found sort of surprising that one of the things our customers like the best is they can email us, right, as opposed to talking to us over the phone. But do you include things automated like your med names within the body of that email? Or sort of more in a more complicated way, if you are landing on one of our landing pages that's about being depressed, right? And we're talking about using PillPack for folks with depression. And then your wife comes down and sits down on the computer. Can we retarget you with ads that are about depression as opposed to just generic ads about PillPack? Is that a privacy concern or is it not? And there's a lot of questions like that there's not a clean answer to, and we have to make judgment calls about what we think is appropriate.
How do you make those judgment calls?
You're looking at. We have sort of heated debates about what we think is appropriate. We oftentimes will reach out to customers and talk through it with folks that we know are want to help us with our product development. Specifically on the refill one, we reached out to a customer that had sort of requested to be involved as we thought about product and asked what they would think if we sent them an email with their med name inside that email, as opposed to obfuscating it and making them log in and then figure out which med we're even talking about. So it's a combination of sort of discussions internally as well as trying to understand what our customers would want.
Yes.
So I'm a freshman at the college, and I'm actually from Southern California, and in high school I did a lot of work with preventing prescription drug abuse and stuff like that. So I've actually been talking to a lot of pharmacies that did that all throughout high school. And one of the things that we kind of stressed on doing was we developed these little pamphlet things that would fit right into the bag of the pill of the things that they put the pills in. Would you guys be open to possibly putting things in there that would warn people against abusing the drugs, because it's a huge problem in South Orange County, and I feel like that would kind of take that ability away.
It's a really interesting question. I think we're very careful to not sort of bombard people with information within the box. We've worked really hard to keep it on a minimal level. I don't know the answer to that question. I think there's some rationale as that customer is are you making assumptions about me personally by including that information? Are you jumping to conclusions about the drugs I'm taking? And I think it's a challenging question.
Would you agree with the statement that a pharmacy has a responsibility with the way people use or misuse the things you give them? Do you have a responsibility with what people do once that gets in their home?
I think you have a responsibility to design the product and service in such a way that you make it, as simple to take things correctly as possible. I think do you have a responsibility to help people prevent drug abuse? I don't think so, but that's a tough question.
I'll go with you first. It's a race. Sorry.
I'm a second year at the School of Public Health, and I'm wondering a little bit about, you talk about the user of the pills being sort of your primary customer, and that's who you're working closely with. But as you think about questions of scale, and as the ACA and the networks sort of start to roll out, and physicians are being evaluated on performance, or patients and things like that, do you have any plans to start working more closely with providers and having them maybe get more of their patients on PillPack, or are you going to stay focused on the user?
Yeah, so we work really hard to communicate clearly with prescribers, and I think we don't do as good of a job at it as we could now. We are almost exclusively focused on the end customer as opposed to doing things like physician outreach and even sort of ACO outreach and things like that. I think that won't change for a while. I think it's hard enough to build something that's great for an individual entity, and as you try to spread out who you care about the most, it gets harder and harder to focus on one thing. But I think in the interest of, take refills as an example that I keep going back to, but how do we engage the physician in that process to make it less painful for the customer? Absolutely. I think there's a ton of it's super important to do that because the goal is to make this less arduous and complicated. If the goal is to reach out to physicians as a way to get to customers to get them to sign up, probably a little bit less interesting. So it's all about how do you make that experience better, and if there's additional stakeholders that we can work with to do that, for sure.
It took some work to get my prescriptions to PillPack through my physician who's in Boston at a network hospital. He sort of gave me this look like, really, you want to go to this online? It sounded very illicit to him.
We figured out why, though. I didn't tell you this.
No, it was,
So there's a space between pill and pack because whoever loaded it into their system screwed it up.
sounds like a branding
It's a
issue.
branding issue.
Okay.
For sure, yeah.
Over here, I've got a little catch up, but I'm going to keep track of everybody.
Hi, my name's Katie. I graduated from the public health school last year and now work for a population health company. And I know you guys talked a lot about empathy before and touched a little bit more on humanity. And I kind of saw humanity correlating to quality of health and quality improvements in patient care. And I'm just wondering if you guys are doing anything with tracking adherence or the overall kind of quality of the patient's health.
So we aren't. The short answer is we haven't gone and studied how effective PillPack is at improving adherence. I do think that at some point that will make sense to do, but the main priority has been about creating a great experience because I think that is what will allow people to actually take their meds. And part of the philosophy is if you get that right, people will take their meds. But I don't think customers as individuals care about adherence, right? They care about it being easy, convenient, simple, and all those things wrapped up will increase adherence, but it hasn't been a focus to go prove that that's true or not true. I think you've had quite a few companies that have tried to build their business on the back of proving that they can increase adherence, and it's a difficult proposition, even though it seems obvious. We waste $150 billion a year on people not taking their meds. There's probably a lot of opportunity there, but it's not as obvious as people think to make it sort of to monetize that and build a business on the back of it.
There was a question. Yeah, it was you.
So similarly, thinking about humanity, like when I go to get my prescription, there's something about the handoff from the pharmacist to me that says this has been thought about very carefully. This is the drug in my hand that I'm going to go take.
Yeah.
And given that this is now an online thing, like this may come from a place from ignorance, but I'm not sure where are these drugs and like how are you ensuring for accuracy and dissemination, I guess.
Yeah, so there's a couple things that we've done specifically to try to push in the humanizing and being personal. So the first is that all of the emails you get, even if they're automated, are coming from the pharmacist that is looking at your prescriptions. And so you have a name when you call in, you can ask for that pharmacist. We also include a handwritten note with each shipment, which I think is trying to push on that idea of handing you a bag and it being someone that you can relate to. That's signed by whoever's actually closing this box and sending it off to you. So I think we've tried to figure out, to your question about how do you do this at scale, like do you assign customers to certain pharmacists? Does like each pharmacist have their 500 or 1,000 customers or whatever it is? Is that scalable? Can you actually do that? Do people want that? And I don't think we have great answers to that yet, but we're talking to customers and figuring it out.
There's a question.
I'm a first year at HPS, so I noticed that during the questions about how you would react to either being, if you come to through an IP or if you were the CEO anymore in that situation or another situation, you said that basically you cared about the mission of the company and you felt like it wouldn't be the same without you there personally. Do you think the CEO is central to any company that's trying to build on empathy and humanity for that mission to continue, or can you build a team to embody that mission to get same?
I think it depends. I think the ideal situation is you can build a team around you that all has the same ideals. And so the original statement around if I'm gone, this thing falls apart is wasn't the exact point. The bigger point was that if the core mission of the company changes, then in effect the experience is going to suffer. And so I think you can't build an organization that's dependent on one human and their sort of viewpoint and expect that to scale. So it's more about who's in positions of leadership and what their intent is and goal is than it is about me individually or as one person.
I would posit, though, that even at the stage you're at, right, well-funded, moving forward with a customer base, that, and this is no knock on your partners or anybody else, but that you're still in a very fragile place where, were you not there, a lot of this falls away.
Yeah, I think that's a true statement.
So I bring that up only in the context of other people in here starting things, thinking, wow, TJ's made it through the gates. Those guys are golden. They got the money.
It's not nearly as glamorous as
A, it's not nearly as glamorous, but B, it's still this really fragile thing.
Yep.
Right? There still needs to be somebody saying, hey, we need to talk to people about this. We had people who signed up and wanted to be part of the design process. We need to reach out to them. Other questions in the room? Yes?
Yeah, my question is about, I don't know if you can actually answer the question, but like, did you figure out the right number of people for one person to deal with in terms of making sure everything is okay? Because I feel like the bigger you get, the more difficult it is to manage like everybody's case and make sure that they're actually okay.
Yeah, we have a pretty good sense of what the ratios of customers to pharmacists to customer service folks will look like at scale. Right now, it's probably drastically different, where a lot of it has to do with the fact that we need to get quite a few folks trained in understanding processes and how to do data entry and customer service. But we do have a pretty good understanding of what that will look like. I think you can look at sort of industry standards and figure out who's doing it well and who's not doing it well, and learn a lot from that, and then try to figure out what additional needs we have that someone like CVS or an institutional pharmacy doesn't. But as far as projecting and models and budgeting, we have a pretty good sense.
Let me ask, we haven't even talked about maybe my favorite secret thing about your company, which is that you have robots. I always wanted to start a company that had robots, and so I'm fascinated that you do in your fulfillment center. To a point that I think is at the heart of your question about the fulfillment, right? There's this idea that a person goes to the shelf, and they are working with a level of exactitude and precision born of years in pharmacy school like you, and that they fulfill that, and that ensures a degree of quality, right? From your perspective, and I'm not asking you to be accountable for robots in the macro, but from your perspective, does that actually remove noise and error from the equation to be able to automate that, or has it created more concern on your end?
I think all things being equal, it has certainly removed noise and confusion. I think having 4 meds per pack per customer is intrinsically more fraught with error than putting pills in a bottle. But we've built processes around that to make it, to build a lot of quality control into it. I think it has certainly freed up the pharmacist, and it's probably more due to the fact that you're sort of able to focus on one thing and do the one thing really well while you're doing your job, as opposed to part of the issue in a retail pharmacy is a pharmacist is getting pulled in 5 different directions and can't really focus on anything, including customer service. And so when a customer's on the phone with a pharmacist at PillPack, they're not expected to be jumping from that to checking a prescription in 3 minutes and have to hop off the phone.
Okay, but so let me ask you the other really scary question. Is the nightmare scenario the Kevin Slavin, the algorithms are all screwed up moment?
Yeah.
Is the nightmare scenario the algorithms got it wrong? We don't know what happened here, and now everybody got the wrong stuff.
Yeah, that would be the nightmare scenario.
Okay.
I don't know, that's a pretty straightforward answer.
I guess my question is, yes, I think that was the obvious answer to that. And if you said, no, we're not that,
whatever.
it's not that big a deal.
It's recoverable.
You would have lost all your empathy cred like that. My question is, how do you solve for that? What's in place? What's in place to prevent that?
So probably 2/3 of our development resources are going to building tools within the to build tools to not allow that to happen.
Okay.
So you assume it's a customer-facing service, and so most of their time building tools that are specific to the web UI or whatever it is. A lot of it is about operational efficiency and how do we do this accurately every time. And so there's multiple checks and balances. Everything's still checked by a pharmacist. There's all the sort of boring underlying things that happen to enable that. But it is, at the end of the day, just a lot of work to make sure that doesn't happen.
All right. Yes?
So one of the main things that we did was we kind of put a lot of responsibility on the pharmacist to kind of prevent people from doctor shopping and getting prescriptions and filling all that type of stuff. And one of the things we tell them is like if the person is kind of looking skittish, or there's all these different things that you can kind of tell about the person when they're doctor shopping or it's a fake prescription. As you guys like grow and become bigger, like are you guys going to take on the responsibility to try to prevent that type of stuff from happening, or is it just going to be? Like, at what point do you try to make that stuff stop happening? Because it's definitely a huge problem right now.
Yeah, so there's two answers to that question. The first is from a sort of tactical perspective, we don't do class 2 medications, which is the medications that are the most highly abusable, because I think it's meaningfully harder to do if you're not in person. There's a lot of it's about the nuance of the interaction, to your point, and understanding intent and things like that. So we've sort of taken the easy road there, if you will, and so it's class 3 through 5 medications. The second is that we take more responsibility than putting pills in a pack. The goal is for the pharmacist to be a central part of your care. And a lot of that is trying to understand, if you have multiple prescribers, that they're all informed about what medications you're getting and being the point person to be able to step in a situation like that. So we're definitely taking that responsibility. And I think as a pharmacy, even from a legality perspective, you have that responsibility.
So let me ask, the natural next step, in all the interviews you've had to do in the last 36 hours, you've been asked about data in almost all of them.
Yep.
At what point is part of PillPack algorithmically making any number of decisions in partnership with the pharmacist? So saying, hey, these 10 things you're taking actually could be reduced to 8 if you did this, or this person looks like they're doctor shopping because we've been able to tease out patterns over time that say, hey, maybe you need to see a doctor, or maybe there's a flag here.
We're certainly not there yet. I think we're collecting the data, but I don't think we're doing anything particularly useful with it today. I think one of the interesting pieces of data that we have that no other pharmacy or really any other entity has is the time of day you're taking your meds. And so we can start to learn about, if you take these 3 meds at 8 a.m., are you also taking this other med at 8 p.m.? We're not doing anything super useful with that data today, but we will at some point.
Does that include contraindications?
It does, yeah. So I mean, as a pharmacist, that is part of your job intrinsically. You are required by law to do a DUR in any medications you're dispensing. And so we are certainly doing those contraindications. But to Ian's point, we don't have tools beyond what is standard of care today that enable that. But
I'm a little thrown because we now are using words that are beyond my purview. I don't know what that means, but I assume that because you answered it, you did. Let me ask this then, do most of you would know this in your space, do most users now, customers, have multiple pharmacies that they're working with?
Yeah, the majority of the customers that are switching from 2 or 3 pharmacies as opposed to 1.
Right. How does that inform the experience that you're then doing? Because you now, the byproduct of that is centralized data that was otherwise dispersed, right? Even if it was theoretically gettable, how does that change your responsibility?
I think it almost makes it easier, honestly, because if you're at a CVS and you don't know what the other 4 scripts they're filling are, then you can't even start to make informed decisions about it.
You mean as a pharmacist?
As a pharmacist, yes. As an organization, I think there are entities that have that data now, right? You have the third-party payer that's going to have a comprehensive med list, but there's no one looking at that med list that's doing anything interesting with it. So I think it's a pretty human-intensive task right now to optimize patients' med lists, but it's certainly something that we do.
So now, as you have this data that you're not planning on doing anything with yet, but is enormously valuable, ostensibly, to other people, how does the promise, the implicit promise that I would at least say you've made to your users, how does that impact the way you now do or don't do business with other entities? Because there's a lot you can't do by law, but there's an awful lot you could do with that data.
Yeah, well, I think you could go and sell that data, right? But I think there's more interesting things to do with that data that are probably more valuable than just selling it. I think if we can build tools both for our customers as well as people that aren't our customers to help them automatically set up reminders and sort of optimize their med lists and things like that with the data, that's probably more valuable than just turning around and trying to sell the data. So I think there are ways that are both in the best interest of the business as well as the best interest of our customers, and those are probably the most sort of interesting places to play.
Other questions? Over in the room. Yes, sir.
So in your nightmare scenario of
Sorry.
essentially your algorithm not working and everybody getting the wrong thing,
Yeah.
what are you liable for?
For all of it. Yeah. I mean, we're a pharmacy that is liable to dispense what was written by the physician. The legality or the liability around meds at a certain time of day is ambiguous because no one else is really doing that. But certainly we are liable to dispense things appropriately and accurately. It's part of our responsibility as a pharmacy.
But I'm getting at, will you be open for business 6 months after that? You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Because now because there's a lot of scenarios where now if somebody took the wrong thing and they're trusting you because that's something they've now, put with, I trust this, I've been using it for 6 months. I took the wrong thing, somebody, God forbid, dies, and you're now in 40 states going on 50 and possibly worldwide, right? So.
Well, that really, can I?
Sure.
Well, I'm going to pile onto your question for a minute.
Thank you.
I think, because this wasn't hard enough, right? In this nightmare scenario in which you've now drugged up an entire nation with their neighbors' drugs, right? It's a little funny. Let's take that, but also bring it down a level.
Yep.
What kind of responsibility does PillPack have as it hits a catastrophe, if it sunsets? What kind of obligation do you have to people if you sell? It's one thing when a service sells itself to Google and we all say, okay, I can't use that service anymore, but it'll be part of the Google toolkit. But these are my drugs. This is what keeps me from whatever isn't supposed to happen. What's that responsibility?
I think there's a lot wrapped up into that. It's like, does it sell? Does it sunset? There's a whole variety of things, right?
But answer it more from a macro. What is the responsibility that you have to people knowing that at some point you won't be the one that you might not be the people who pay off that promise?
Yeah, I think you have a responsibility to act like a human, right? And to try to treat people as you'd want to be treated if you were them. I think specifically around if we're sunsetting, I think the goal is to make that as smooth of a transition for them as possible, right? So if PillPack no longer existed, how do we make that as pleasant as it is going to be and help you work through that? How do we transfer the scripts proactively so you don't?
Because you made it really easy for me to move my scripts from CVS to you.
Make it so easy to move them back, right? So I think the responsibility doesn't just end the day that you decide you don't want to be a PillPack customer anymore, right? How do we make that entire transition smooth? I think that goes for whether we're closing the business or whether someone's leaving as a customer. It's not that as soon as you're not a customer anymore, we shut you off and we're going to make this as difficult as possible. That's a core ideal in the business.
We have to have another question because we can't end on me asking TJ about the end of his company. Somebody have a happy question, please.
Raised money today. This is
you raised money. Congratulations. When you close it, how's that not going to suck?
So, by way of background, I'm a CFO and a financial consultant to early stage and high growth companies. So my question is kind of a continuation on the theme, but there's a positive. You're welcome. There's a positive spin, I hope. So this question of liability, have there been posed or perceived liabilities, probably from a legal type standpoint, as in the following example, that seem to run counter to your whole MO? And if so, how did you deal with them tactically?
Can you explain what you mean a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So in this case, somebody's proposing this sort of nightmare scenario, the likelihood of which is very, very low. Right? Yeah. But you could take that, you could say, well, that's kind of a non-starter. If that were to happen and that were possible, then we really can't continue at all. Have you dealt with something that there was a concern that was raised at a much sort of higher probability, but a more likely scenario that did look like it could be insurmountable, and maybe it's something that you have to tweak your strategy?
If I understand your question correctly, I think the short answer is no. I think from a liability perspective around if we make an error, if there's something similar to that, I think medical errors as a whole happen a lot more than people want to acknowledge. And the story is more about how do you build systems to eliminate them as much as possible, and how are you fully transparent when an error does occur. I think, are you talking specifically not met errors, but just were there major risks in the business that we didn't?
It could be anything. I mean, somebody may have seen a perceived fault in the packaging itself and said, well, somebody had a certain medical condition, this could pose some sort of risk to them, for example.
Yeah, so I think there are certainly use cases where this service isn't perfect for every type of customer. I think from a VC level, there were certainly folks that didn't feel like it met XYZ and didn't make sense for them. But overall, we have investors and folks around us that fully believe in what we're doing.
Come back here. How have you found working with your dad?
It's great. I mean, we worked together for about a dozen years now. We've done the role reversal a little bit. But I think I have way more to learn from him than he does from me. And so it's been a lot of fun. Enjoy it.
Ian, you said that there was a small list of companies who do embody empathy on a huge scale.
I really thought we were going to get away without that.
I'm done. You got to answer that question.
Oh, you wanted to hear it?
Yeah,
All right. So first, we're invoking the no Apple rule. Anybody who answers Apple to any question ever you should call bullshit on them because it's the answer to every question, right? We talked a little bit about automotive companies. I look at companies like GE that invest enormous resources in qualitative research, more around professional services and products than they do around consumer products, at least that I'm familiar with. An extraordinary amount of time dealing, for example, with GE's agriculture business, and a lot of that invested not with large agribusiness, but actually with small family farmers. I think they do an extraordinary job of that research. Now, how that manifests itself, I can't speak to as well, but I know that they put a lot of time and money into it. I think there's been some really interesting work in the automotive space. In the last decade, you see it in all sorts of ergonomic work and safety work, specifically in the last decade or so, actually in American cars. Ford has made huge leaps in a lot of their design around safety services in vehicles. But you also see it in dumb little things. The story behind the, I forget which minivan it is, that you put your foot down underneath the bumper and it opens the trunk so you can get your groceries in, was born out of customer interviews, and some really interesting ones with moms. How do we build a vehicle that actually suits a mom who's got her hands full all the time? But beyond that, the list of suspects gets fairly short. We bandied around ideas like Patagonia, but that's really a company that's rooted not, I think, in notions of empathy and humanity, but more of the virtues of Yvon Chouinard and his love of the environment. Frankly, we think we had a really hard time coming up with a long list of companies that do this very well. There's spots, there's features that are tied to it, but I don't think many companies. Dimitri's going to contradict that.
Oh, no, it's an odd tactical question, but so you said a lot of your people, our customers, are going or have relationships with 3 or 4 different pharmacies. Yeah. Why? Or I mean, outside of like obscure stuff like compounding, why would you be sourcing medications from all these different locations?
Oftentimes price. So sometimes it's a bit cheaper to buy this generic at this place and then bill my insurance over here. You see that a lot with folks that are filling some at mail order pharmacies versus retail. So brand name drug is meaningfully cheaper if you fill it at the mail order pharmacy. That's one of the major use cases. Another is oddly like the convenience of I just got the script at this doctor's office, which is on this side of town. So I'm dropping it off over here, and then I got this script at this doctor's office, which is over here, and then you end up going to both pharmacies.
You just never change it?
Never change it. So that's sort of the main use cases. I'm sure there's others, but those are the big ones.
Is there any, I mean, I imagine a significant use case for you are people for whom it's hard to get out to a pharmacy. Does that come into play?
I don't know. I don't think it is a major use case that we've seen. With a family caregiver, it is. So in that instance, it is. But a lot of times, there's a lot of other things wrapped into that. Like if you get to a certain sort of age demographic, we found that you're pretty used to filling your pill box. You actually don't hate it that much. And a lot of times, you're getting your meds from your mail order pharmacy, very price sensitive. There's a lot that gets wrapped into that. So I don't think it's a huge use case for us, but I'm sure there's some folks that is a major sort of feature.
I saw a hand over here, I swear. Any more? All right. Any more questions? All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to come do this. If you have questions for TJ, I assume you'll be around for a little bit, right? So thank you for all the good questions and for your time this evening.